What's happening, ladies and gents? Welcome back to another edition of the O Show podcast, episode 399, presented by Mayweather Boxing and Fitness in Scottsdale, Arizona, the heart of Scottsdale, Arizona for Mayweather Boxing and Fitness, opening up in just 3 weeks. You got 3 weeks to get a membership. Mayweather Boxing and Fitness in Scottsdale offers an authentic experience for those who want to learn from Floyd Money Mayweather's techniques and training regimens. Again, just 2 more weeks before the grand opening. Get your membership today. We're also brought to you by betonline.ag. Get 50% off from this episode. Sign up for a 50% bonus. BetOnline AG, the #1 gambling marketplace in Las Vegas right now. We have a special episode for you today. And again, honestly, I have not been this pumped up for an interview in a long time, honestly. Brian Bogert, thanks so much for making the trip out. I know you live here now, but you have been all over the place.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've been all over the place. Thank you, by the way, for that comment. I'm excited to be here as well. I don't know that I'm that exciting, but I'm going to do the best I can to add value to your audience, brother.
The stash is overwhelming.
Yeah, well, one of my business partners calls it the trust stash. So
really?
Yeah. He says it's like my way of connecting with the world. My mustache reaches out and lets people trust me.
I used to have a man bun.
Did
and
you?
A giant beard. Yeah, literally like a month ago. Hair down to here, beard down to here.
I mean, good for you.
Looking like Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters. Living my best life.
I love it.
And then I just got tired of it.
Yeah, which, by the way, is okay, right? That was a part of who you were for a little bit, and then you move on.
Professionals don't necessarily look like that.
No. Well, so here's the thing.
You have to build your brand in a certain way.
I didn't have a mohawk, and I didn't have a mustache until I was really clear on who I was.
Really?
So, I mean, both of these things are somewhat new. They're in the last year. So it is what it is.
You got to reinvent yourself.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at pictures from a year ago, I look like a really, really like lame dad. And I played that role really well in the corporate world, but yeah, I'm really owning myself now.
So where have you been the past month? Because I know July was a very busy month for you, going on shows. We talked about Brad Lee's Dropping Bombs podcast.
Yeah. So it was July was also an experiment. So I was all over the place, but this was one of the first times where I was really trying to integrate my family into all of my travel. So I was in 6 different cities in the month of July. I was only home 3 nights, and my family was with me pretty much on 4 of those 6 trips. So I was in Charlotte at our studio. We were doing some filming for some big projects that we're working on. We were in San Diego. I was speaking at and attending a number of events and kind of working through a couple of big projects that we've got with relationships down there. Was in LA area. I recorded with David Meltzer on the Playbook. Yeah. He's a good friend of mine. We've been circling each other's worlds for about the last year. Have a common shared mission of impacting 1 billion lives. So that was fun to get together with him. And then in Vegas, we're transferring all of our courses over to Lightspeed. I've gone in a very intentional 9-month process with Brad Lee. And so we were going up there actually to record the interactive component of our courses. But while we were there, we got the chance to be on the podcast. And then that night, once we got done with the podcast, he said, why don't you do closer school for me? So we got 2 hours to run with that, and that was a fun little opportunity. So, man, I've been all over the place, and it's been a blast. But a whole lot's happened in the last 18 months that's coming to fruition right now.
Yeah.
And it's just been beautiful to experience, and, we're just trying to deliver, and we're growing and scaling and impacting lives. And so I'm having fun, man. I'm living my best life.
I mean, we talked about it a little bit off the air before we went on about you just challenging Brad Lee. In a way, he's probably never been challenged before, at least on air.
Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. I mean, so first of all, what I have to say about Brad, he's easily one of the smartest people I've ever met.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody who interacts with him or witness him, you can see the intelligence in how he's processing information, how he's literally taking in variables every minute. But he's also got that really strong alpha personality, right? I mean, geez, his freaking logo is a rhino that literally runs through walls. Right, so that's Brad Lee in a description. He's just that guy.
Yeah.
And because he thinks so fast, talks so fast, moves so fast, I think a lot of people don't quite know how to take it, and it's a big energy. I think I was prepared for that energy going in because I've seen him, I've interacted with him, I've been working with him a little bit over the last 9 months, and man, that was just a fun conversation because I challenged him, but not challenged him for the sake of being right. I challenged him from a perspective.
Yeah.
And that happened on more than one case where, he's someone that because he's so fast and smart has defined belief systems in a lot of areas, like many of us form. And the cool part is he also receives a challenge of perspective when it comes from a place that he views as credible.
Yeah.
So, it was an interesting conversation. Anybody who watched that interview, did you watch it on YouTube or did you listen to it?
I watched it on YouTube. I have to watch.
So if you watched it, you got to see, too, the change in his body language throughout it as our conversation went. And he leaned more in because he had a greater degree of trust. And we walked out of that room, and Brad and I are talking about collaborating on a whole bunch of things at this point. So none of it's come to fruition. I'm not doing that from a name drop, like, oh, I'm running with. That's not what I'm saying. But he and I are brainstorming on a whole variety of ways, just because we found a really cool mutual energy that we can feed off each other, and hopefully impact some lives.
That's the most important thing. Like you could be partnered with a big name like Brad Lee, who's probably got a ton of great business potential if you were to partner with him. But like if you didn't like him, if there was no chemistry there. Like,
I wouldn't do that. By the way, and by the way, that was also what I was looking at with him is I wanted to, I don't make decisions on someone or a decision to go into business with somebody. I learned this the wrong way during COVID. I said this before COVID, and during COVID, I broke my own rule, which is I would never go into business with somebody that I haven't met in person.
Yeah.
Because, you can get a good read for somebody, but for me, I'm so focused on how I'm reading the individual, which is so much more than just facial expressions, tone, delivery. It's also energy.
Yeah.
And energy, some people can transfer over the screen, but they can also transfer what energy they want over the screen. And so, whereas I can pick up on a lot of the intricacies. So in COVID, I'll say this, I started a business with people that I had never met in person, and it lasted 3 months. And then I discovered some things that we ended up dissolving it. It is what it is, right? It was a lesson learned. But with Brad, he has such a polarizing personality. And I have to say this to his credit, right? I believe he's got a giant heart. He's got a giant heart that's conditioned to literally do good and put good into this world. But if you look at his path, you look at some of the people he's run with, you look at some of the things that have happened, the guy's broken like a lot of us. And I don't mean broken like he's not an unbelievable guy that's doing self-work and building businesses. I mean broken in that we all have pain in our lives. We all have things that have happened. We've all been screwed. We've all been, right? And so I think he just has this really polarizing approach because of what he does. He knows how he can get reactions out of people. That's part of his intelligence. And when you pair his intelligence with his heart, I think that's what I wanted to experience in person is he the person I believe he is? Because if you watch his content alone, which is great, it's polarizing.
Oh, yeah.
And you can't always tell, like, that big heart's in there. I said that to his face, so I'm not saying anything to you that I haven't said to Brad. But that's what I had to connect the dots with because, he could be the greatest guy on the planet to help me grow my business. But if there's not an alignment for me with that individual, or there's not an alignment for me with that individual paired with what that individual can bring to the table that will actually contribute towards more collaborative impact towards our goal of impacting 1 billion people, then it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
It's out of alignment. If it's not, my life is built such that it's in such alignment that I know when something fits and when it doesn't. It's self-regulating.
Yeah.
But I have to shake somebody's hand, meet them in person, understand their energy to see the complete self because people can hide behind a camera.
Oh, yeah. And that was like the biggest thing you talked about in that interview with Brad, too, because he, like you said, will read you as you're talking to him.
He's brilliant.
Yeah. And right off the bat, he's asking, where you're from, what's your story, everything. And then as the interview's going on, you're taking charge. Like you controlled most of that interview towards the end where he was just asking kind of like with puppy dog eyes in a sense, like, okay, how do we do this? How do we do this? Like, what if this happens? And you're like, who cares what anybody else thinks? And he's like, yeah, but like, what if you throw everybody's problems in a pile? And you're like, who the fuck cares? And he's like, oh, like I definitely saw you almost not exposed certain insecurities that he had.
No, but he talked. Here's people who are avid listeners for Brad. And again, I'm saying this all out of honor for Brad because I have a deep level of respect for him, especially after our time together. But, on that call, or on that podcast, there was a lot of his listeners that didn't know that he had kids with multiple wives or multiple women. I don't think he said wives, he said women, like, huh. Right? So he says this out loud. He talks about how he screams at his girls when he gets angry if something goes wrong, right? And, oh, by the way, that takes a lot of strength to be as vulnerable as he was in that environment, knowing he gets 250,000 downloads per episode, right? He knows what his audience is. And so for him to take that armor down said a lot about who he was and that he wasn't trying to uphold an image. He was truly trying to become a better, more aware person. And so what I loved about that is you're right. There was a dynamic that was there, but he realized at some point, oh, I might be able to learn something in this conversation. Yeah. And he went into not a controller guiding mode, but to a consuming intellectual curiosity mode. And you saw that pivot and he did it beautifully. But because he showed that side of him, like I told you before the show too, he's getting feedback from his audience that they haven't seen him in that way before. And he's getting a lot of positive feedback. They're like, Brad, let's see more of that. That's what I do, right? Vulnerability and authenticity are like a huge core of what I believe in this world. It's the glue that binds human connection.
Yeah.
If we can't demonstrate vulnerability and authenticity, particularly in this digital world that we're in, then there's a misalignment between who we are in person and whatever brand we're representing, whether it's our own or somebody else's brand, like truthfully.
Yeah.
So we have to pay attention to that because, again, vulnerability and authenticity and true strength actually hides behind vulnerability.
Everybody's got their own shit, right? Everybody has their own stuff. You see on social media, out in the world, everybody just posting their successes.
Well, it's
very few people post their failures.
That's right.
Which made that interview so good because, again, it was unlike any other interview that he's done before. And I'm sure when you guys were on the call before and you're talking over like what you're going to talk about, how, that certain dynamic is going to work, you're probably thinking like, I want this to be as real as possible. Like, because
that's how I am with every single show, to be honest. Like, I want it always to be real. But yeah, that's what I wanted with Brad. I couldn't quite tell where he was going in our pre-interview. He was just probing, and really what he was doing was trying to extract nuggets of gold that he could trickle in. But the cool part is we didn't script a thing. There was nothing that was there. And I think as I also mentioned to you, when he had talked to me about what I was reading on him, he didn't want to hear it at the table before the talk. He's like, let's talk about it on the show.
Yeah.
Which again says a lot about him because whether I was going to be good or not, he had no idea at that moment. Like if I was actually going to give him something valuable in what I read in him, but he's like, let's talk about it on the show. So he already went into it ready to expose himself because he thought there might be some value there.
Yeah.
So that's what I liked about him is he was trying to figure out where can I extract value, but he wasn't trying to script the discussion. And, he thinks fast enough that he pivoted on his feet many times.
Yeah.
So.
And he actually wanted to, again, quote unquote, unpack stuff with you.
He did.
In a way that he hasn't done before. Because again, like you said, like if you look at that on paper, kids with 4 different women, the businesses that he's had, whether, early on failed and to get to the point where he has been, like there's a lot of, things to unpack there in a sense. And the thing that I wanted to, again, share with you or, share my audience with you is your story.
Yeah.
Growing up, you grew up, or you were born here, right?
I was born here, moved around. Yep. I lived in California for a little bit, lived in Australia and England both for about a year and a half, all before the age of 6. And then we moved back here when I was about 7.
What did your parents do for a living?
My dad was very high up in the aeronautics industry, and so he had reps all over the world. And so in that period of time, as he was growing his career, which he ended up leaving not long after, we got back to the States. But the intent was he needed to go be where the reps needed him. And so that's where we did. And he would travel globally. And it was a cool experience because we gained a lot of global perspective at a very young age.
Yeah.
And that really kind of put us in a good position. But then came back here around 7, and I've been here, other than college, the majority of my life.
And you were 7 when the accident happened?
Yep.
7 years old?
Yeah.
Kind of touch on that a little bit. Because again, I know you share it on every show.
Yeah, no, I won't go into the full detail just based on how we even brought it up. But I mean, when I was here, we was here at Tatum and Bell here in Phoenix, actually. The Walmart up there. My mom, my brother, and I went to get some stuff for a house project that we were working on. And when we were ready to get in the car, a truck pulled up in front of the store, parked, and the driver and middle passenger got out.
Yeah.
Passenger all the way to the right, felt the truck moving backwards. He moved over to put his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up on the steering wheel, and he was 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at us. So hit us, hit my car, ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tire track scar on my stomach, and continued on to completely sever my left arm from my body. So this was August 10th, 1992. It was a 115-degree day. My mom and my brother saw the whole thing happen. They were just a few feet behind me, and they looked up and they saw my arm laying on the parking lot about 10 feet away. Fortunately for me, my guardian angel also saw the whole thing happen. She saw the life and limb scenario, and she rushed immediately into action. So she came over and stopped the bleeding on the main wound, saved my life, instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside of the convenience center or Walmart, grab a cooler, fill it with ice, and get my detached limb on ice within minutes to potentially save my limb, at that moment not knowing. And so, truthfully, Jack, like, had she not been there that day, I either might not be here with you today, or I'd be here with you today with a cleaned up stump. Because had she not taken action on both those things, I just wouldn't be here.
Like, in an unfortunate scenario, it's like almost that was meant to happen. Like, she was right there,
100%.
seeing it happen and go down and knowing that I know exactly what I need to do right now in order to save this kid's life.
Yeah. And oh, by the way, she was delayed in checking out at the store, too. So she got delayed for about 10 minutes, getting progressively more frustrated. And when she walked outside, she knew why she was delayed. So that's like the next part of that story that just brings some perspective to the fact that she was meant to be there. And so when I say that she was my guardian angel, that's not just a phrase. She saved my life and she saved my limb. Now, a whole lot of other people were involved, But it was her quick action that really brought it to fruition. And then everything else went from there. So, I know I've got a unique story. So I have to say this because I always say this after my story because I think it's important for us to normalize when we hear extreme stories. I have a very unique one. But what I've also realized in all my time of doing this is every single human being on this planet has unique stories. What's important is that we pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories and then become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. We also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories. So what I love about how you talked about getting into this, your ability to learn, you're tapping into collective wisdom. You're listening to other people's stories and using it as perspective to shape your own opinion and belief on who you are, who you want to serve, who you want to impact, and how you want to navigate through this life. We all have the ability to do that if we're paying attention, if we're listening, and if we truly seek perspective.
If we don't get caught up in all the negative things that happen. Like,
oh, yeah.
How far along, like at what age did you kind of put all this together? I know it's a long journey to get there. Yeah. You know, those first few years afterwards, like still a kid.
Yeah.
You're literally a baby boy almost.
I was 7. I've got a 7-year-old boy right now. So I know how young and little that is. My son was the exact age I was during my accident, March 6th of this year. That was a moment for me.
Wow.
Just because of what you said, the size that he is. The journey is long. And there's like way too many details to like really cover effectively in the time that we have. But I will tell you to answer the specific question is when did it all come together? It's been in the last 5 years.
Wow.
I've had different journeys that have taught me different things in different periods of time. And I can go into depth in any one of those where we need to, but I'll say that I initially formed an intellectual narrative that was all based around mental toughness until I realized where our narratives can fail us, which is when the world buys into them, right? And buys into them and they're not actually true, right? I've had a whole journey and that whole journey was also focused around emotional intelligence and redirecting attention from me because I didn't want to be the center of attention. And I remembered how quickly people would look at me with disbelief when I told them my story as a 7 and 8-year-old. They'd look to my parents to confirm my story.
Yeah.
Right? So that conditioned some things in me. That next period of time, though, after that, was I really focused on human connection, vulnerability and authenticity. How do we actually start to grow through this? How do we actually get people to bring their walls down? How do we start connecting with them? And I did this through a completely different business. I mean, some of the core concepts that I teach and believe were applied in our last business that with my business partners and I, we scaled to over 15 million within the span of a decade. So I was doing these things not as a coach, formally, right, in the first part of my career. And then I started coaching, doing more work with what those things looked like, and it led me down this other path of starting to feel emotion in a way that I always believed I felt, but never really understood.
Right.
Until one day I cried on the couch with my daughter when she put her arm around my neck and told me she loved me. Unexpected joy hit me, and I realized I have not been actually feeling feelings in full color. It's been in a grayscale. And so I had to start to understand that. But the emotional piece is what really started to bring it together because I realized that emotional intelligence, human connection, intellectual narratives are nothing without emotion, right? Human connection without emotion is not human connection. So I'd mastered it from a strategic and tactical standpoint. Yeah. I knew how to get people to let their walls down, but did I actually embrace it fully myself? No, I was sympathetic, not empathetic. I could intellectually connect to the concept and see what they were feeling, but because I didn't have feeling myself, I didn't feel it. I couldn't demonstrate empathy and compassion, which means that I can't actually connect. And we're all hardwired as humans, right? Around 4 basic things I believe the human experience is rooted in. Feeling safe, feeling protected, and those are not the same thing, feeling seen and understood, and feeling connected, right? If I can't have emotion through vulnerability and authenticity to focus on human connection, to use emotional intelligence, I can't make others feel safe, protected, seen and understood or connected, and I don't have those things either. That's what it's all rooted in.
Well, when it comes to empathy, like you have to have, not the exact same experience, but similar experiences in order to have that connection, correct?
No, I think you have to have similar feelings. The experience doesn't have to be the same.
Right.
Right? So I can talk about my shame that is completely different than somebody else's shame. My experience with shame, the way it manifests in my body, where it has impacts in my life, where and how I'm triggered by it, right? Same thing with anger. Like that's my own unique experience with anger and shame. So people won't share that experience with me, but will they understand the feelings and the byproduct of what those experiences and feelings can create for us? Yeah, because when I can talk to somebody about how shame would show up in my marriage, right? Through the lens of my wife would ask me if I'm spending time with my kids on the weekend, and I would hear that through my shame lens, which would cause me to be defensive and get a little irritated and angry, right? When she was a completely neutral, objective question, which was just genuinely like, hey, what are our plans this weekend? Because husband and father is so important to me, I would hear it through the lens of, you're not being a good enough husband and father. You're not showing up for our kids. And so I'd get defensive and list the 10 things in the last 4 days that I did to be a good husband and father. Right? So I can talk about that experience through the feeling of shame, and that can resonate with someone because they're like, oh shit, I do the same thing. Right? But what my root of shame is not a common experience to anybody else.
Right.
So that's why I want to make that distinction, because empathy has, you and I could have two completely different paths, but if we understand the emotion of loss, sorrow, grief, guilt, fear, scarcity, like it doesn't matter if we understand the concept of the emotion, we can connect with somebody through empathy.
Right. And what you were saying there, when it comes to your shame lens, in a sense, almost your ego in a sense as well, thinking like, what, have I not done enough for my kids? Just like one simple question triggers and your wife's like not even on the same page.
But that's the point. It's the root of an emotional trigger, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's that. And so that's what I think binds us all, is that we all experience those things.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
We just experience them very differently. So if we bring these together into just a universal concept around the human experience, again, those 4 things that we're all hardwired for, we realize that we need to be whole human beings emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually, right? And then we start to recognize that we've lost the art of thinking, we've lost the art of teaching, and we certainly have lost the art of feeling, because the external narrative of the world is don't feel.
Yeah.
Shove that shit down, show up, put a smile on your face, go to work. We got to move, right? We got to move in this world. We don't have time for emotions. You can't let emotions affect you. It's literally the narratives of the world. And so we just don't do that. So one of the things I say often is we've got to learn to not just think, not just feel, but we need to learn to think about our thinking, think about our feeling, feel our thinking, and feel our feeling. It's in those quadrants that success lives, so that we can become a whole, complete human being. That's how we connect from an empathetic perspective, because I can think about your feelings through the lens of my own and feel them simultaneously, which allows me to have empathy to connect with you, even though I wasn't a part of your experience.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And again, just, studying, your craft, listening to some of the interviews you've done, like that's the first step, kind of being aware of everything that's going on.
Huge. Yeah, awareness is the first thing. I mean, we all want to have a more level of influence or control in our lives. We just do. And you've consumed interviews, so again, some of these things you've heard me say before, but I'm going to say them until people start to feel them.
Yeah.
But we understand that our minds process 11 million bits of information per second, but we're only consciously aware of about 40.
Wow.
What that says is that we're largely led by the unconscious, right? Which is why awareness has to start before anything, because what we're unaware of, we cannot be intentional with, but what we're aware of, we can be intentional with.
Right.
So there's not a single person I've asked that's not like, hey, can I have more influence and control in my life? Like, everybody wants it. Yet we don't do the work that's necessary to actually get it. So we sit there feeling like a victim, feeling like fate. And until we go through a systematic process to move the unconscious to the conscious, the unaware to the aware, it's going to feel like we're stuck. It's going to feel like we're a victim. It's going to feel like it's fate and we have no influence or control over our destiny. So I am a big believer. All of our concepts, whether it's who you are, where you're going, who you're impacting, who you're doing this for, it doesn't really matter. Purpose, legacy, all of the above has to be viewed first through the lens of awareness, followed by intentionality based on that awareness.
It's almost, again, you got to be aware of what's draining you and what's driving you.
Absolutely.
And that's hard, again, like you said, like 40%, like that's not a good number.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of people who just go through life thinking, like, again, I'm 22, I can't relate to this, but there's a lot of people who are married who are just going through the motions, I feel like, in their marriage. Like they're in their 50s, they're in their 60s, really haven't like had that true passion in a long time, but like it is what it is.
Well, think about why COVID hurt so bad. It knocked people out of autopilot.
Yeah.
Like literally people have been operating on autopilot for decades in some cases. How often, right, would people get up, go through their same morning routine in the morning, get to the office, drive there, do all these things, and by 9 a.m. they're like, wow, I don't even remember what I did this morning, because it truly was on autopilot, which is why COVID hurt so bad for so many people, because it forced us out of autopilot and we had to redefine patterns in our lives. And that's also why it caused so much pain, right? Physical abuse has gone up, household domestic violence has gone up, suicides have gone up, mental illness and wellness have gone up, because the ability to numb by staying in autopilot was stolen from us.
Yep.
Right? So all the things that we did in our lives that patterned where we could just truly be a robot and be numb and not feel were exposed. For the first time, universally, on the planet, for everybody.
Which is a great challenge, personally. Like I
It's
know
huge.
me, like, again, a young kid could rely on my parents living at home, building this, doing podcasts, with everything going on and nobody being allowed to do anything. Like, perfect time for a podcaster to reach out to anybody and be like, you can do my show because I know you're home just creating content.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't have an excuse.
Oh, and by the way, I leveraged that too. I mean, I did over 250 in the last year.
Yep.
Right. So I looked at it as a window of opportunity because I'm not going to be able to do that cadence of podcasts probably ever again. But when I can stack a 12 to 14 hour day in 30, 45, 50, 60-minute windows back to back because I don't have to drive anywhere.
Yep.
I don't have to commute anywhere. Right. I can get a whole lot done. So that's how I viewed the last 15 to 18 months was literally an opportunity. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't pain that came from it. That doesn't mean it wasn't a crazy, difficult year. But part of our awareness is to recognize just those things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, neither of us would be sitting here right now if it wasn't for the last 18 months.
Yeah.
I would not have, I would have liked to think I would have grown it to this point, but I probably wouldn't have reached out to as many people. I wouldn't have known how to use Zoom to connect with a Dave Pratt and have an interview and then get invited here and, have this crazy last 6-month experience.
Yeah.
And on your end as well, like growing your
insane.
platform to the point where, again, like you're traveling the entire month of July, doing shows, creating your own stuff, both business-wise and podcast-wise, we wouldn't be here.
That's just the truth, right? But think about that too, right? Like not only does this a universal unifying thing in that we were all knocked out of autopilot, it also was the only time I'm aware of in history that everyone on the planet was leveled to the same playing field. Right? CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies are now interacting on Zoom out of their home just like their lowest level employees.
Yep.
And it brought a normalization to the human experience in a way that I think is waking people up at a time that it's really necessary. Right? For so long, we've been focusing on the what's of the world.
Yeah.
What house, what car, what amount of money, what amount of success. That's just what we do. That's the narratives of the world. And we've shifted at some point from focusing on people to profits, right? What's and profits kind of go hand in hand. We're chasing this external factor that doesn't really focus on what unifies and connects all of us, which is the human experience. I don't care what business you're in. People are involved. When people ask me what I'm an expert in, I'm an expert in people. I've been studying people, human behavior and performance for over 20 years. Because guess what? It connects to everything we do. So if you understand how to read people, how to engage with people, how to move people, how to interact with people, how to lead people, how to guide and invigorate life into people, right? You can truly change things because it's all about people. Mm-hmm. So when we were chasing the what, we've truly been in the era of what and the era of profits. And I think COVID's giving us an opportunity to usher in the era of who and usher in the era of people. And what that is right when we get rid of all the what's that the world's told us to chase and we realign with who we are, who we're doing this for, who we're trying to impact. What's beautiful is all the what's in our world become a manifestation of who we are.
Oh, yeah.
It's way more powerful and we move faster with less effort. But it's the same thing in business. Look at how many times now in this last year, because CEOs have been leveled to the same place as their lowest level employees, we're now focusing on people more than we have at any point in the last decade within business and corporate America. We're looking at flexible and remote work things because we've realized, people can work from home. We don't have to micromanage their lives and make them be just a robot because of our system. Like we're starting to see this evolution and awakening in a way that's going to be really powerful. So again, I would just invite anybody listening, be intentional to focus on ushering in the era of who. Who are you? Who are you doing this for? Who are you trying to impact? And oh, by the way, what are the people in your life that you're doing this? The who's that you're running with? Focus on them first. In the last 18 months, we've spent almost 90% of our resources and the revenue from our business reinventing and reinvesting into people, not systems and resources to replace people. Leverage technology and systems where they help you, but people first, because people are going to lead those systems anyway.
That was the part of the interview with Bradley. I know I keep mentioning him, Bradley. I swear he's not a sponsor of this show. But
he's getting a lot of airtime, though.
I know, right? Big guy. But my favorite part about that interview was at the end when you guys were talking about, working for people. Like there's so many people that are plateauing or so many people that just aren't where they want to be because they're thinking about how can I grow me? How can I grow my brand? As opposed to saying, how can I help other people? Because not only is that going to feel great and authentic, but it, eventually is going to help you.
So it is, and as long as you're doing it not for the purpose of it benefiting you long term, then it's authentic and it's real. That was something that we talked about because he talked about what he wanted to do with his business and his growth, but that's just the case in life, right? And what we really broke down there is I genuinely try to determine if and how I can help in every scenario.
Yeah.
Right? I might not always be able to help. But for me, when somebody approaches me with something and they're not trying to just get something from me, but even if they are, I still want to ask enough questions to validate with high intent, can I actually provide value into this person's world, whether it's through me, through time, energy, money, resources, or connections? And so my wife and I've had this philosophy on giving until it hurts for a long time. And I think what I was really challenging in that whole dialogue was that the earlier and more consistent we find ways to give and then learn how to receive, the more we will receive over the long run, which means the more we will give over the long run. So we have a lot of people that are like, oh, I want to wait until I'm 100 million in net worth before I start really donating and impacting the community. Like, to your point, like, I got to focus on this. I can't give until I have the resources to give. And it's like, well, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, even from a wealth generation standpoint, because what you've done is giving yourself an inability to receive 20, 30, or 40 years of benefit from you continuing to give in the universe as well.
Right.
I do believe they're directly connected. And that's one of the things I've been working on is my ability to receive, because I've given until it hurts for years to my own detriment in a lot of cases. And I don't say that to impress. I say it to impress on the point. Like, that's how much I believe in this. But it was Meltzer who, a year ago, I asked him, I was like, what's my greatest blind spot that I'm just not seeing? And he said, you're really shitty at asking for help and you're really shitty at receiving. And he said, Brian, the thing you need to recognize, he said, I've seen you move mountains when it's for other people. But if it's for you, you don't. You don't ask. You just figure it out. And I was like, yeah. It's like, but he's like, here's the thing. You want to impact 1 billion lives. And the way that you've lived your life, the way you've demonstrated it, the way you operate in general, he said, anything that benefits you will benefit other people.
So does that kind of go back to the shame factor when it comes to
I think it's 100% connected.
Not asking for help and also being very shitty at receiving things?
Well, dude, my intellectual narrative right after my accident was I'm good, I'm strong, I'm capable, I can do anything myself.
Yeah.
So it's probably largely connected to the fact that I felt like I had to learn how to do certain things because there were so many people that were already limiting me based on their own way they viewed me through their lens in my situation.
Wow.
Right? Like, literally. I cannot tell you how many times, and it still happens in my life. People are like, oh, like, you can play sports? I'm like, yeah, I'll probably kick your ass too. Right? Like, oh, you water ski? Yeah, I learned how to get up holding onto the handle with one arm. Oh, you were a tennis pro for a few years? Like, you played and taught it that? Yeah, I did. How did you toss the ball? I tossed the ball up in the air, and guess what? I don't have a tricep, so my arm would flop down. But I did it. Right? Like, people genuinely place limitations on others based on their own belief of what they could do in their scenario. And so for me, yeah, I think that was a big part of my inability to receive is I received so much negative energy. People who are always inspired, like, oh, your story, it's so amazing. But like when it came to my capabilities, there was doubt. And so I just told myself I wasn't ever going to live into that. I wasn't going to allow those ideas to be embedded in who I was. So yeah, I think I gave because I felt like I could give selflessly and not have to worry about what came back at me. But I've learned that the more I give, the more I actually have the opportunity to receive if I learn to. And the more I can receive, like Meltzer was spot on. Like, for the last 9 months, that has been one of my sole focuses is my ability to ask for help, surround myself with help, surrender to the fact that I'm not capable in certain ways that I've even tried to convince myself I was. And yes, it was all rooted in my shame.
Wow. And again, like, you use that in a sense, like, if you buy in to what you were saying, like, if you bought into what everybody, kind of thought or, like, assumed that you were doing, like, oh, I can't believe you were a tennis star. Like, I can't believe you played sports. If you bought into that, so many excuses, which would not only trap you, but at the same time wouldn't allow you to grow your mindset, which has allowed you to grow everything that you've done to this point in your
100%,
life.
because I genuinely believe that, like, what I had to learn to do is that there's always a way, right?
Yeah.
If the purpose is big enough, it will always overtake the pains required to become the person you want to be or to do the things that you want to do. And so for me, it's always just been focused on, like, how do I elevate and push myself to my absolute limit? No, by the way, we've got this no limits philosophy. The whole concept there is not that we're all capable of doing anything. I can't go be a professional basketball player. Let's just call it what it is. I'm 5'11", and I have one arm that doesn't work perfectly. Cool. Probably not going to compete at the top level, but can I compete in a 3x3 tournament on the weekend? Yeah. And I haven't touched the basketball in years, right? But point is it's like we are capable of more than the limits we place upon ourselves and certainly more than the limits we place upon the world. But we have to test that limit because it's not until we reach the edge of the limit that we actually know we're capable of more.
Yeah.
Too many people are afraid to hit that limit because they're afraid to burn out. Some of my greatest moments of growth were literally when I burned down in flames. That's why I've got a phoenix tattooed on my arm. I've reinvented myself 45 times. I say I'm on version 48.2. Right? Because it's a constant evolution of self. There's no final destination. So to your point, what I would challenge, because I know there's naysayers, and sometimes I'll speak like abstract and esoteric in certain ways, and I know that about myself, right? Some of what I talk about is philosophy. And the reason I talk about philosophy is because strategy and tactics is what most people think is going to get them where they want to be. And so they're constantly replacing strategy and tactics. Well, what did you do to get healthy? What diet did you get on? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. What works for you? Strategy and tactics are really important, and they will get you far. And learn strategy and tactics from others that have learned and already done them before you. Like, I'm not minimizing that, but that's not what's keeping you stuck. That's not what's keeping you from being the person you want. That's not what's keeping you from reaching your potential. It's a combination of emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning. And we can recognize that everything begins and ends with us, right? This is a philosophy that I'm just asking people to look at. Hey, if you're circling the drain, you keep repeating the patterns in your life, you're not feeling fulfilled, you're not becoming who you want, your current belief system isn't working, try something else.
Find
right?
mentors.
Buy into a philosophy, right? That's all I'm saying. Buy into a philosophy, because whatever you're doing today, as much as you're fighting the fact that this is going to work for you, it's not. Otherwise, you wouldn't feel stuck. You wouldn't feel miserable. You would be exactly who you want and exactly doing what you want to do. But that's not the reality of the world. So it is a philosophy. And if people would buy in, I think they would really lean in and recognize, like, because, oh, by the way, when we do this work for others, they genuinely experience exponential growth personally, professionally, in relationships and health. And I don't say that as a promise. That shit's the hardest fucking journey to go on. But if you put in the work, it's beautiful on the other side, because we can truly holistically experience joy, freedom, and fulfillment. We can have the connection and the intimacy and the relationships that we always want. And I don't just mean sexual intimacy. Intimacy can exist between two people in general. But that's what we all want.
Yep.
Yet we get in our own way of getting it.
Either experience is going to be sucky too. Like, if you get out of your comfort zone and grow, it's going to suck. Like, it's like that
while
old
you're
saying of
doing
like
it,
two hards, you know? Like,
well, I mean,
they're both
dude, that's
hard.
my philosophy, is embrace pain to avoid suffering. That's literally my life message.
Yeah.
Right? It's that concept, right? Is that at the end of the day, we all must choose our pain, or our suffering will choose us. And so, like, we have to pay attention to that. You're exactly right. It's going to hurt either way. I'd rather take that short-term pain versus the long-term suffering.
Yes. Did you do anything, you know, again, learning those curves and learning how you have to face pain in order to avoid overall suffering? Like, any, like, small things, like taking cold showers or, like,
yeah, so
workout
there's biohacks, of course, that I find.
Yeah.
You know, for me, it's even deeper than that, because my body, right?
Yeah,
Here's the thing. I have existed with an element of pain my whole life since my accident. I don't have a lat in the left side of my back. I don't have a tricep in my left arm. My bicep is my gracilis from my leg. Just call it what it is. I have an imbalance in my back. I have a curve in my spine. I've had pain physically for years. 15, 20 years ago, it started to get to a point where it was debilitating. It was suffering. It impacted my quality of life. It was no longer just chronic or intense pain. It was like suffering. It was debilitating. So I learned that if I stayed lean, I focused on my core strength, I ate the right foods, and I just stayed active, that it would mitigate that. So it was no longer suffering or debilitating, but just a manageable everyday pain.
Yeah.
Okay, so I went and I did what everybody does when they decide they're going to join a gym, or when they want to get healthy. I went and joined the gym, and I went consistently for 30 days, and then I stopped going. Now, had I not done the work to understand the suffering that was already going to exist if I didn't put in the work, fortunately for me, I felt it real time. I was already suffering. So it was an easy thing to pay attention to. Where it gets hard is when we don't already suffer, or don't already know that we are suffering, to identify and acknowledge the suffering we wish to avoid, because it's equally, if not more powerful than the goals that we set for ourselves. We have to bookend the way we view the world. It's two sides of the same coin, right? So when most people set goals, they set goals, but they don't look at what are they trying to avoid. We have to pay attention to that. So because I'd done that work, I had to ask myself an additional question. Is it the pain of working out? Is it the pain of lifting weights? Is it the pain of plyometric? Is it the pain of lifting? Is it the pain of stretching that I'm avoiding? Or is it the anxiety I get in a crowded gym?
It's the mental side.
It was the emotional side. It was 100% the anxiety I got in a crowded gym. It was not my environment for success. Again, so had I approached strategy and tactics, what would I have done? Gone and joined Orange Theory. Would have gone and tried a different gym. Would have tried a different nutrition. Well, this gym just isn't for me. It's a strategy and a tactical approach. But instead, I had to go a layer deeper. What was keeping me stuck was my environment, based on the anxiety I was getting in that environment that was rooted in an emotional trigger. So I had to embrace the pains required to take the time, energy, and money to set up a home gym so that I can create my own environment for success, so that I can avoid suffering in my life. Right? This concept applies in everything. Now, we talk about discomforts. Discomforts are the 5K to pains marathon.
Yep.
Right? So not always do we have to unpack this, but geez, I went through emotional pain this last year unpacking something in my marriage. Right? Was it hard? Yeah. But nothing worthwhile in this life comes easy. It was the hardest work I'd done in my marriage ever, but it started with a belief system that we're actually in the best place we'd been in 14 years until we uncovered something. Now, we could have avoided it. And had we avoided it, it would have just continued to fester to a point that we were either in a loveless marriage with no connection that would end in divorce, or we'd be stuck in a marriage when we actually wanted divorce. Neither one of us wanted that.
Both numb options.
Everything we wanted was right in front of us, but it was us preventing us from getting it. So we had to unpack that and do the work and be honest with each other. Now, that was painful.
Yeah.
Right? My working out every single day, it's discomfort. right? But once you do it consistently enough, it's no longer even uncomfortable. It's just a part of who you are.
It is so much better to come out of that on the other side knowing that you did it.
Oh,
Because again,
always.
like with whether it be marriage stuff or going to the gym, how long did it take you to unpack all of that, dating back to like the first trigger that you ever experienced, whether it would be like stubbing your toe or like your dad yelling at you for not doing the dishes? Like, where does that come from, and how deep do you actually unpack things to get to that resolution?
I go pretty deep. Yeah, I mean, you know this because you probably listened to some stuff, so you see this. But it goes very far back, and I think our triggers are the things that are rooted in enough often that we don't even realize.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, I talked about shame. It took me a long time to uncover shame. So this is a perfect example. And by the way, I'm still unpacking shame.
Yep.
Right. And I don't care what emotion we're talking about. They will never go away. You will never shut them off. They will be adversaries in constant pursuit for the rest of your life. So we have to be vigilant in our efforts to overcome the damage or the pain that's created because of our emotional triggers, right? So I believe that emotional triggers are the root to all of our freedom. I just genuinely do, right? I talk about emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, environmental conditioning, but the one that's the tip of the spear is emotional triggers. Because you can reverse engineer behavioral patterns and environmental conditioning if you know the trigger, but you can't the other way around.
Oh, yeah.
And so for me, shame, the reason I couldn't identify it is because there's two talk tracks in it. Brene Brown outlines this best. I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. And that was not where my primary narrative lived. I've been there in moments, we all have, but that's why I wasn't like, oh, I'm dealing with shame. Mine was on the other side of it. When you shut that down, you go into the arena, you're ready to go to battle, it's who do you think you are? Everything major in my life that I ever did, I felt the need to apologize for. And so I was literally boxed in with shame. And that's the thing about shame is it is the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing. It presents itself as guilt, worth, defensiveness, perfectionism, scarcity, fear, like you name it, it literally manifests as these different emotions. So it's really hard to identify. So this one thing with shame, it probably took me 5 years to really get to a point where it's not something that I have to focus on every single day because it shows up differently in different environments. I have about 6 different ways that shame moves through my body, and I've got over 50 triggers.
Yeah.
So what we guide people through is what we call the inside out method. Right? If we look at, I'm going to start by the outside. This is what the world tells us, right? And it'll make sense where we're going with this. But on the outside, right, it's movement. We got to move. We got to go fast. We got to act fast, right? So that means there's really no time for anything else. Movement is the only focus. I'll unpack the rest of the outside in when we come back because movement is what drives outside in. Inside out is that we've got to be aware. We have to be aware of whatever emotion is impacting us. We have to be aware that it's impacted our lives, our relationships, it's done different things. And we have to be aware that we have some work we've got to do.
Yeah.
Then we got to own it. We need to own that, this has affected me. Yes, it's changed the way I've acted and behaved in these certain ways. I need to own the fact that it's created patterns in my life. And oh, by the way, if my trigger is like most triggers, it's created damage in the lives of other people. So I've got to take ownership for the damage that I've done to repair on those sides.
Yeah.
Right? I talked about what happened with me with my wife with shame, right? Defensiveness came out. Guess what? I created damage in that scenario. I implemented triggering one of her triggers that was not my fault, but it is my responsibility as her partner to take care of it.
Right.
Right? So we've got to be aware first. We've got to own it second. And ownership truly means like we've got to own it for ourselves and own it for the other people that we've created damage for. Here's the thing about triggers that I'm going to say before we go to the next 2 steps. Triggers are designed to be pulled. So we can either let our emotional triggers pull us and react, which will create damage, or we can pull the trigger on our emotional triggers and respond, which is where repair happens and often doesn't even need repair because it never creates damage.
Right.
Okay, so understand this because this is the process to get there. Aware, own. Those 2 steps most people can do.
Yeah.
The next 2 steps is where it gets hairy. Okay, unroot is the 3rd step. And again, this isn't a 4-step system to success because, again, to be very clear, this is highly complex.
Oh, yeah.
So this isn't like you can take these 4 steps and free yourself tomorrow. No, this is going to be years of work going through the same cycle of processes for the same emotion, multiple emotions. It never ends. So unroot. You got to unroot, get to the root or roots of that emotion. So for me with shame, there was a few of them. They're mine. I'm not going to share them. They're mine and only mine. But I will tell you that I was able to get to the root of them. Right? But we've got to get to the root of them. A root of shame, for example, could look like growing up in a competitive household where you're constantly stacked against your siblings and you're never the one that gets the attention. And so you just feel unworthy, but you've got this competitive drive and you're always going to chase it, but you don't understand why. And you always feel shitty about yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Shame can look like your parents having an unhealthy relationship with money, telling you that the nicer things in life are not things that we need to desire. That's not our side of the street. We'll stay with our people, right? And all of a sudden we can't actually bring money into our world because we've got a scarcity mindset and we think money is bad.
Yeah.
There's shame connected to the ability to earn money in that type of dynamic. So I'm giving those examples because people need to really do the work to understand the root or roots. And again, it's not just of shame, it's of any emotion. Okay? Once we've unrooted it, we need to go to movement, which is the hardest part. Because we have to understand, how has this emotion moved through our body? How has this emotion moved in our life? And how do I move through it moving forward? Okay? So I just told you just a second ago, my shame, I have 6 or so different ways that it moves in my body. Right? If I'm in a corporate meeting in my old world, I talk fast and I'm loud. I can't tell you how many times somebody reached over and was like, shh, shh, like, can't talk like that in here. Slow down. They're not going to be able to consume and absorb what you're saying right now. And then I would immediately shrink down in myself. I'd bite my tongue. I'd feel small. I wouldn't do it, right? Like, whether my physical body shrunk down or that was just my persona inside, it didn't really matter, because my energy changed in the moment because I was triggered, right? I told you the defensiveness with my wife. But it's also impacted my ability to actually grow and scale different businesses, actually receive and ask for help. Like, you name it. The list goes on how shame has impacted it. But there's about 6 different ways it moves in my body. Again, with my wife, it's more of an anger response. My chest puffs up. I don't shrink down. I want to yell. Like, it is what it is, right? And so I have to defend against this because I feel like I have to justify who I am as good enough. And that's nothing due to her, right? That's just because of the way I've been conditioned in my life. So once I understand how it moves in my body, then we have to start to understand, what are the things that trigger us, right? So my wife looking at me after I loaded the dishwasher incorrectly could trigger me, and it would have nothing to do with her. It could have everything to do with my grandpa looking at me when I was 7.
Yeah.
Right? We have to recognize that triggers don't necessarily mean that what is in front of us is true. It's triggering us into a state or an emotion or a feeling that's going to affect our energy from that moment forward. Whether we react to it with words or reaction in terms of like outbound, or our energy just shifts, either one changes what's about to happen next. And so once we start to be able to pattern and connect between the things that trigger us and the way it moves through our body, then all of a sudden we can start to move through it. Because in those moments that we're triggered, and we're able to identify what element of shame, is this my defensiveness? Is this my worth? Is this, like, what element of shame is this connected to? Then all of a sudden we can pause in those moments, ask ourselves, is what's happening in front of me right now true? Or is this connected to the way I'm conditioned and patterned because of my trigger? And oh, by the way, I can pause in those moments and choose a different path. Mm-hmm. That's how you start to change patterns in people's lives. That's how you start to create and change generational patterns through families. Because a lot of these triggers, by the way, are inherited. They are. They're multi-generational, right? And so at some point, where do you break the cycle? Everything begins and ends with you. You're the one who can do it.
Right. And like, looking at it from that perspective, it's going to take a long time. Again, like,
the rest of your life.
A long time, still a daily process, no matter what. Mm-hmm. And when you look at, step 2 in owning it, like you said, as an example, going to the gym after 30 days, and you're like, I feel good, and you kind of lose that motivation a little bit, and then all of a sudden you go back down into that spiral. Yeah. Like, when you look and track progress, like you take years, decades, learning these steps, and then you track your progress in a sense and think like, okay, you're triggered by one thing. Like, let's say an event happens and that trigger comes back. You almost feel like you didn't progress at all, even though you were following the steps. Yeah,
so we're human. We're not perfect, and things will come at us in ways that we don't anticipate.
Yeah.
Right? So I'll give an example for myself. Now, I don't deal with shame on a daily basis anymore. But we can be in dynamics, too, that we also have to be aware, because sometimes it can come back. But again, ask what's actually happening. So on my trip in July, my scheduling was insane. I typically won't run more than 3, max 4 coaching sessions in a day. Because the level of work that I do, right, it's heavy sometimes for people. We got to unpack some stuff, and that's how we get them to be free. We teach them how to embrace their pain, how to move through it, how to flip these emotional triggers on their heads. It's heavy. Well, I had 5 sessions in one day, which is the most I've ever done in one day. And it was a good day. Great coaching sessions. Everything was awesome. And I went back to, we were camping up in Flagstaff at the time, so I was in a coffee shop. I go back to my family. We're hanging out that night. And it was on the tail end, by the way, of our trip to Charlotte, which was just amazing, and I was still riding high from. All these belief systems on like where I was at, what I was doing, who I was, all these things that was like feeling good, right? And that night, I started like literally falling into a place of feeling like a piece of shit. Why does anybody want to listen to me? Right? Like, do I actually have something of value to offer the world? Like, dude, I'm standing up multiple businesses to impact 1 billion lives. I clearly believe that this is something that needs to happen, and that we, our team, and everything that's happening is behind it. But yet the narratives in that moment were doubt. It was fear. It was like, oh man, like, am I going to be able to do this? What was cool is I had a really amazing person next to me, and my wife, who's my greatest coach, mentor, counselor, friend that I will ever have. And what we were able to identify is that shame that triggered me wasn't actually mine. It was the shame I'd unpacked in 4 of the 5 sessions that day for my clients, and I'd absorbed their energy. I was carrying their weight for them, and it wasn't mine to carry. So part of empathy and part of feeling in some ways is that sometimes we'll carry the weight or emotion of other people's. It's not even ours. So in that moment, I thought I was triggered, but I wasn't triggered. I was able to shed it almost instantaneously because the feeling I was experiencing wasn't mine, but because I've been in it, I was vulnerable to carrying it. Does that make sense?
I mean, 100%. Unfortunately, everybody has to go through that every single day because, like, you could be surrounded by someone who just has a negative attitude.
But it's true.
And then you absorb it.
Which is why I say I do think this is the path to freedom. Like, if we think about this, if every single person you knew in your life, or you, knew all of your emotional triggers, right? Mine are rooted primarily in shame with secondary ones in anger.
Yeah.
Right? That have also manifested as perfectionism and control and different things. I'm just going to own it. Look, I'm working on this. I'm a work in progress. Okay? But if all of us knew our emotional triggers and we knew how to move through them and we knew how we could feel them, be aware of them, be intentional with them so they don't create further damage and further separation, particularly in the relationships that we care most about, whether it's our personal lives or our professional ones with business partners or whatever, any of them. If everybody understood their emotional triggers and knew how to move through them, could you imagine how much less conflict there'd be in the world? Do you imagine how much less negative energy there'd be in the world? Because that's what all these things are. We have a conflict with somebody and it triggers something in us that creates a resistance that we feel we need to defend against for some reason, where if we could just focus things from a neutral, objective, and non-judgmental perspective and just sought perspective to have an intellectual or an emotional discussion, we see things totally differently. But we get so stuck on being right instead of getting it right. And these are the things we just have to pay attention to. But if everybody knew their triggers and they knew how they showed up in work, how they showed up in philanthropy, how they showed up in their personal relationships, how they impacted their health, right? These cyclical patterns of like, oh, I want to lose 10 pounds, and then I put it right back on afterwards. Guess what? That's rooted in an emotional trigger, right? You open up multiple businesses and you can never seem to break $1 million of revenue or really grow beyond that. That's an emotional trigger. You lack intimacy and connection in your relationship and marriage. There's some trigger there that's keeping you apart. You don't have the relationship with your kids you want. Guess what? There's a trigger behind that. So we've got to pay attention to the fact that we are highly complex, dynamic beings that feel and experience a whole lot of things, much of which is ours and much of which isn't. Awareness is the only way that we can start to weed through and actually see ourselves more clearly amongst all the noise of the world.
Unfortunately, this word can get out given the technology and the social media and all the platforms we have. Unfortunately, social media is a double-edged sword. You know, people will use it to hurt other people.
That's correct.
Unfortunately. And you have obviously done that. Not that, but, you know, you've obviously done that in the opposite direction phenomenally, especially over the past, you know, building your platform. More people are obviously starting to view your stuff. Obviously, I've listened to like 3 interviews this week, which I was insanely excited to talk to you here today about everything you got going on. And you got multiple different platforms. I know you're at Bogert Brian on all social media platforms. Your website is brianbogert.com, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And where can we find, you know, whether it be the steps? I know you have a ton of other projects. You guys were talking about Podcong.
Yeah, we've got really 3 different arms outside of our coaching, speaking, and courses and development stuff. We have really a systems efficiency and automation platform that largely leverages LinkedIn right now, but we have other tools that are a mix of it. That we believe is an ability to really still focus on the who. So all of our stuff is connected to the who. So it's either you know, helping understand who you are, identifying and reaching who you want to reach or impact, and demonstrating to the world who you are, right? Like that's really kind of what it comes down to when it comes to the entities that we're focusing on. So this LinkedIn is about not only finding a way to introduce who you are to other people, but making sure that you're curating conversations on your calendar because of demonstrating with relationship first and letting them know who you are versus what you do out of the gate. We're converting at 20 to 25% higher click rates off cold invites on LinkedIn. So it's genuinely converting to not only audience growth for people, but direct leads that have been monetized in multiple industries now. So this is a fun one that we're working on. Podcong is we're flipping the podcast world, podcast booking service on its head. You know, so many people do this, and we're in the process of doing it. I'm not going to share all of our trade secrets on what we're doing because it truly is different than everybody that we've talked to. So because we're in beta phase right now, I'm not going to give the granular details on it. But I will tell you, like, we are going to basically be putting money in the game for the podcast's hosts as well. We're going to be doing a rev share, and the way that we're booking shows is on a different metric than what most use. And so this is going to be a fun one. We've got 20 shows right now in a beta test with a whole list of guests that want to come in, but it's to take what is typically approached as a really transactional, almost Timex approach to booking guests with shows and making it actually be like a concierge service, a Rolex process where we're literally putting the best of the best guests with the best of the best hosts in a very highly curated way. So far, the feedback's been phenomenal, so we're really excited about that. But it's another way to monetize shows, too, and get quality guests as a result. And then the last one, we've got this media and content arm. So we're working on this thing called Who Stories right now.
Yeah.
And this is something right now, all that exists is a 1.5-minute trailer of mine. The full one is actually going to be released very soon, but we've got a list of 20 very, very large influential people that we've already gotten commitments from a number of them. And we're in the process right now of actually creating these stories to tell the who stories behind the who that the world sees.
Wow.
In a way that's a little bit more raw, certainly more cinematic than what we would normally see in this platform. So everything we're doing is to touch upon the who. We've also got one of the best ghostwriters on the planet who's going to be doing docu-books as a result of the Who series for each one of these things, so that there's actually like a full thought process. And then those that we're going to be using this as a service for, not as these top 20, which we've already run a few people through, we're also giving them content that's usable for the course of a year, all from one experience. So it's a 48-hour experience where we literally move people and expose and bring out some of the more raw elements of their lives so that people can allow their truths to give them permission to live theirs, which is what I believe is one of my core missions in life, is to allow my own truth to give others permission to live theirs.
Wow. And that's definitely going to be a real and authentic, presence, especially on screen.
Yeah, it will. I mean, I don't know if you saw the 1.5 minutes, but it's raw. It moved me. It's my own story. I've told my story, I don't know, tens of thousands of times. And I got emotional watching those 90 seconds. It's actually the first piece of content that I have ever been, like, the one on screen about my own story that, like, moved me that way.
Yeah, I mean, when you put it in that dynamic.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, huge credit to our creative team, our partner with Littlefield Companies that we're doing this with. I mean, huge credit to them, because it's their creative eye that was able to extract this and put it into a format that people could consume.
Wow. And of course, with PodCon, like, all podcasters out there need to listen to that, or, at least learn more about it. Like, especially, everybody has podcasts, right?
Yeah.
Everybody has a show. There's a few people, well, actually, I'll say it like that. A lot of people have podcasts. Very few people have shows.
Yes.
Turn their podcasts into actual shows
Yes.
where they're monetizing it and they could do it for a living, as opposed to, being in your basement and just doing stuff with 2 microphones.
And my business partner right now, he runs a bunch of masterminds for podcasters as well. That's all around growth and monetization and different things. So the way we're doing the booking service is also to help podcasters grow their shows, their audience, their monetization. It's got to be a win-win for everybody.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're just trying to change that game, because it's, I mean, you probably get a bunch of them every single day where it's like, hey, I'm a biggest fan of your insert name here show. Right. And, oh, we've got the best guest for you. And then half the time they're not anybody that actually aligns. They've never even looked at your show or know what it's about, but they're just spamming it through a completely automated process. Like, look, at the end of the day, podcasts are a platform to be able to put good into the world, help people tap into collective wisdom, and tell stories that need to be heard. I don't care what stories those are about, business, personal life, health, it doesn't matter, right? So at the end of the day, if we recognize that that's what podcasts are, why don't we try to curate the ability to put the best stories and conversations out into the universe?
100%.
I don't want to commoditize the podcast business. Let's curate the podcast business. Let's make sure that we can bring the right conversations with the right hosts and the right guests into everybody's earbuds.
100%. And I'm very excited for that. Definitely would love to talk to you about that more moving forward. We're definitely going to have you on the show again.
Yeah.
But again, we're not Joe Rogan. We can't go 4 hours.
I got you.
Time's ticking.
Time's
I don't own the studio. So
yeah, I know.
Maybe one day.
One day. You'll probably own a studio someday.
But the last thing I wanted to ask you, because I'm very curious to know, with all the different businesses you have, obviously doing what you're passionate about, how do you utilize this to set an example for your son? Again, just 7 years old. Like, what are you doing with him to kind of teach him and show him the ways to creatively? Because again, 7 years old, formative years coming up, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah, my daughter's 6, so we do it actively with both of them. And, I don't, we talk a lot about the business because it's what we're all doing and we view it as a family business. My son has made comments to me in the past like, Dad, I think it's about time for me to join the family business. And if you look in my content, by the way, he's dropped some bombs on some pieces of content that have gone in there. Like this kid gets in front of the camera and just riffs on stuff, and it's incredible.
Yeah.
So he's clearly learning by just also absorbing. But my wife and I are just really intentional in our house to make our kids' hearts happy.
Yeah.
Right? Like helping them live the lives that they want to live, because we know we're born as the brightest burning authentic light will ever be. We don't want to dull that light. And so we're trying to do everything we can, recognizing we're going to screw a whole lot up in the way to literally lead by example. And so if one of us reacts, we focus on repair. We repair with our kids. We talk openly about things in front of them. We want them to understand. We help them understand what's going through their bodies, their minds, their souls, right? My son, there was a great example. He's on the autism spectrum, right? He's brilliant, but he's also difficult in a social scenario. And when he was getting older in school, he was having more and more challenges to the point that kids were starting to bully him, tell him he needed to change who he was. So we created a whole morning routine for him to help him understand that who he is perfect. And we now have him in the right school where he's flourishing as a result of being around people that understand and see him. Because again, he had to feel safe, protected, seen, and understood, and connected. The traditional school system wasn't going to provide that for him. So we had to understand that, unpack that. Where's he at? Where are his emotions at? How's he processing through this? How he's reacting to that? You know, my daughter, she's an empath. She feels everything. So another great example is something I just talked about before, right? She literally absorbs the energy of other people better as a 6-year-old than I've seen most adults be able to do. So there will be moments where she'll just be like, I don't know why I want to cry right now. It's happened in my gym the other night. We were stretching, and I'm struggling with my own relationship with my body recently, right? That was a root of some of my anger, is the fact that I have to have a 2-hour routine every single day just to move. My pain is to that level, but I want to live this life, so that's the pain I embrace, okay? But I was doing stretching at night, trying to get in something, and I winced because I hit a trigger point in my back on something, and I was really trying to get in there. Well, it also triggered me because when I winced, she could feel like my anger and sadness about the fact that I even have to be doing this at 8:30 at night, but it's what I was dealing with that night. So she, in that moment, and my wife was out there too, we were all stretching. My son was playing with a friend that night. And she said that. She's like, I feel like I want to cry and I don't know why. And we'd had fun, we were laughing, we were happy. And so we just paused long enough to pay attention to what it was. And I said, sweetie, I think you're experiencing mine. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, when I winced, I said, what I haven't talked to you about is that Daddy's been struggling with his relationship with his body. And I think you picked up on my energy when I hit that trigger point because you were good until that moment.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we're trying to help her do is to recognize the weight that she needs to carry and the weight that she carries that isn't hers, similar to the example I gave earlier. So when you ask, how do I live by example with my kids? We talk about everything I talk about publicly in our household. They have seen me move through my own anger and how I've changed based on understanding my triggers and how I interact with them differently. And I wasn't a screamer or a ragehead, but my energy is different now, right? They've watched my growth and evolution, and they've watched us execute a buy, sell, and walk away from a life where it was on paper everything everybody ever wanted. I mean, we grew to a $15 million business. That wasn't all my revenue, but I was one of the partners in it. We did just fine. We had all the what's that we ever wanted, but that was one of the things I decided is that I wasn't going to just hit the easy button and allow my kids to witness that's the way we live life.
Wow.
And so my kids know that we walked away from something to go do this to impact other lives. So we try to live exactly like we preach, and we're not perfect, but we try every day to get a little bit better. We do get better every single day. And our kids have watched my wife and I change the dynamics in the way that we interact, the way that my wife is growing and healing. Like, we talk to them about all this stuff. They're 6 and 7, but they feel it. So even if they don't understand it, we just have to find the way to communicate with them. And what I know, again, because we talked about these hardwired narratives, my son is intellectually hardwired. My daughter is emotionally hardwired. They both have both in a very strong way. Yeah. My son feels deeply, but if I don't enter through his head, I can never get to his heart. With my daughter, if I don't enter through her heart, I'll never get to her head. So we've learned these things, and we talk about it in our house real time.
Wow. And the most important thing there is that you're leading by example. No matter how hard it is, you have to lead by example.
It's the only way.
As a parent.
And that's, again, I want my truth to give them permission to live theirs. I don't want them to go as long as I did, having to refine myself. I don't want them to ever lose themselves. So if we can create a platform and an environment for them to just live into who they are, they don't have to do some of the hard work I've had to do.
Wow. And again, you are BrianBogert.com, your website, at Bogert Brian, the other way around.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming in, man.
Dude, thanks for creating a platform.
We are going to have to do this, again, like 10 times over with the amount of things I want to ask you.
Dude, we'll do it. I mean, we're both local, so it's just a matter of getting on the calendar. I'd love to contribute. I'd love to have a regular conversation.
Let's get
That'd be
lunch.
fun. Yeah, we could do that too.
That's what we were talking about before. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be a podcast.
Yeah, it
That's
doesn't.
just the way it was wired in my mind.
I know. It's okay.
But again, Brian Bogert, thanks so much for coming on the show. This was episode 399 of the podcast. Remember, we're sponsored by Mayweather Boxing and Fitness. Thanks for watching, guys.